It. This is where it almost ended. This was just about the end, right where the sandbar is, right alongside where I am now. Down through this area ahead of you is the Yukon River flowing towards us. In the latter part of May of 1897, the beginnings of 7,000 boats and over 28,000 human beings were flowing right towards the spot where they would land. This was the beginning, the real beginning, the big beginning of the gold rush. And where did it take place? Right behind us here to the left. Back behind those buildings. That's up where the Klondike River is. And beyond the Klondike, even higher, was Bonanza and El Dorado. From Dai that we saw a couple days ago, over the Chilkoot Pass, Lake Bennett, Lake LaBarge, and down to the Yukon River, flowing past these hills with the sun on them, and down to this point. Let me pan the rest of the river so you'll see it. You'll also see that there are other photographs that were taken in this direction and show exactly this configuration of these three mountain ranges that we're focused on. The spot I'm standing on was probably almost exactly the landing spot for those 7,000 craft. Today, you can see a ferry down there. That's the newest ferry, and its only purpose is to take cars across the Yukon now for the going to the Sky Highway out of Dawson. And then here behind me, of course, the town of Dawson, an extremely authentic town in the sense that there are many buildings that have existed ever since the turn of the century gold rush.
Well, shall we move on to the next group? Thank you.
Don't know what kind of machine this was, but what's interesting about it is the combination of wood timbers as a frame and the metal for the gears and the wheels. It was some kind of a derrick, because you'll notice that this top part up here hinges. It may have been an early form of a steam shovel. Now you can analyze the workings of a railroad train real easily. Up on top was the boiler. Right at this end here, the wood went in where there was a big fire. Tubes went through there filled with water. And they in turn created steam up in this big boiler here. That steam was condensed down here in these piston units. Pistons, I mean those narrow shafts going inside. And they're going in and out. Force the wheels to turn. On a camming device, if you will, causing the railroad train to move forward. The purpose of this little train was simply to move cars around in the yard and for very short hauls, not for the big, powerful movement of cars full of gold ore. And this looks like just a big old steam tractor, using the same principle. But notice the flywheel up on top, which would have had a belt used on it, would have become a power takeoff for who knows what. Maybe it was for running a lift of buckets filled with ore. These are some of the early wooden ore wagons that obviously were used to haul ore. Notice how they open up at the bottom to drop it out. Probably not unlike the ones used in Southern California on the 40 mule team borax runs. This pile of rock I'm standing on is just one small portion of who knows how many square miles of the same kind of what Clark's Ready Mix would call pit run. And what it is the tailings of some giant worms that worked these gold creeks of the Klondike and Bonanza and El Dorado. Back just before the turn of the century, it began and of course terminated sometime in the 60s. Throughout this area are littered the equipment that they used. This was some kind of a steam engine, it appears to be. The most dramatic of all the machines remains here to my right as I pan about. It was the zenith in mining technology. It was called a dredge. And this is the last remnant of one such dredge. Notice its steam engine, characteristics of locomotives and other kinds of heavy machinery of that day. But with its huge arms that stretched out and were controlled by these posts that you see here apparently, it was able on one end to eat up thousands of tons of this rock as it worked its way down to bedrock where the gold was. This rock then moved inside the dredge where it was sluiced out, just as in the normal miner's sluice, and the tailings kicked out the end by another conveyor type device, which then laid them in these worm-like deposits that we see all about this area. These lakes or little ponds are characteristic of these operations and of the layout of the topography today, because water was the absolute necessary requirement for gold operations, whether you were panning for gold or whether you had one of these giant 3,000-ton dredges. The other requirement, of course, was electricity. At this point, I'm just a few miles up Hooker Creek, which is a tributary, side tributary to the Yukon to the Klondike River or Creek. And as you can see, just looking through this area, that virtually everything has been touched. Even way off in the distance, high on the mountaintops, many of them have been sheared off in the search for gold at all the levels, which there were primarily three. The first level was that which was found pretty much lying on the surface, and the second was that found down beneath the till or overburden that has been now ripped up, and the third was found at various geological plateaus within the topography itself, which accounts for the mining operations at various higher elevations. This is the Yukon River, looking south. From that direction, in 1897, in some manner or another, 7,000 boats and 28,000 people moved towards us into this town, a former mudflat on the Yukon River, Dawson. Their purpose? To mine this river tributary called the Klondike. There were even tributaries to the Klondike, and one was this one, the Bonanza. It was the El Dorado and Hunker Creek. The primary method in the later years was the dredge. The dredge left these worm-like trails of rock debris and literally covered the entire valley of the Klondike River and of all of its tributaries where gold was searched for. And these tailings run for miles up the Klondike. We'll pan further northwest up the Yukon River just so you can get some sense of the dimension of the Northwest Territories landscape. Awesome, seldom marked with any kinds of roads or settlements of any sort at all. One clear exception is the road system you can see here, which is called Going to the Sky Highway, reminiscent of Going to the Sun Highway in the Beartooth Mountains of Montana. Just in case you're wondering, this is what it looks like at about 1 o'clock in the morning in Dawson.
Sam McGee, written in Whitehorse by Robert Sayers. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who mourn for gold, and the Arctic trails hold secret tales that'll make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam McGee. Well, now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. And why he left his home in the south to roam around the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, and he'd often say in his homely way that he would sooner live in hell. And now it was Christmas Day, and we were mushing our way over the Dawson trail. Talk of your cold to our Parker's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. And if our eyes we closed and our eyelashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. That same night as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were all fed and the stars overhead, they were dancing heel and toe. He looked at me and Cap said he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking you, now you'll not refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low, I couldn't say no. And he said with a sort of a moan, it's that awful cold, it's got white hold, and it's chilled me right clean through to the bone. Now it ain't been dead. It's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains, and I want you to swear, foul or fair, that you'll cremate my last remains. Well, a pal's last need is a thing to heed, and I swore I wouldn't fail, and we hurried on at a streak of dawn. God, he looked ghastly. He was crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. Well, now there wasn't a breath in that land of death, as I hurried horror-ridden, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you can tax your brawn and your brains, but you promised true, now it is up to you to cremate these last remains. Well, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern cold. And in the days to come, though my lips were numb, God, how I cursed that load. And in the long, low nights by the lone fir light and the huskies around in a ring, they howled out their woes to the homeless souls. My God, how I loathed that thing. Every day that quiet clay seemed heavy and heavier to grow, and on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad, and I was half mad, but I swore I'd not give in. I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it would hearken with a grin. Then I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay, and I saw in a trice it was jammed in the ice, and it was called the Alice May. Well, I looked at it, and I thought of it. Then I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. And some coal I found that was lying all around, and I built the fuel on higher. Flames they soared and the furnace roared, such a blaze you'll seldom see. Then I burrowed a hole in that glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I took a hike, because I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled and the huskies howled and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, I don't know why, and a greasy smoke in its inky cloak went streaking down the sky. Well, now I do not know how long in that snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they jumped all about ere I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside, because he must be cooked. This time I looked, and then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile that you could see a mile. And he said, oh, come on, will you please close the door? It's fine in here, but I gravely fear you're going to let in the cold and the storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, this is the first time that I've been warm. Well, now there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. And the Arctic trails hold secret tales that'll make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam McGee.
Strange things are done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. And the Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee.
This is the town of Dawson. It was the most notorious, most focal point of the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896, 97, 98. With my video camera held in my hand as I drive along, I'll try to show you something of Dawson. One of the fortunate, remarkable things about Dawson is that much of its history is reflected in buildings that were built during or shortly after the gold rush that still exist. And you'll see many of those as I drive down through here. Dawson is built on a mud flat, in other words, where the Klondike River makes a corner, and where the Yukon River makes a corner, and where the Klondike comes into the Yukon, it deposits a lot of mud and silt over the course of centuries. It was that silt that created this mud flat where the town was built. This is the Keno. It's a paddle wheeler that was built after the gold rush, but reflects much of the design of the ferry boats that were built immediately after the beginning of the gold rush to move passengers as well as the gold ore. Now I'm going to drive down here slowly and let you just look at these buildings. This way you in essence will see Dawson as it's of course seen today, but also it reflects a great deal of what existed shortly after the gold rush. And now we'll go down some of the side streets and look at some of the other old buildings. You must remember that this was a town that in the space of less than a year grew from a few hundred to as many as 30 to 40,000 people. 30,000 in town and 10,000 out in the creeks. And much of what you're seeing at this very moment existed at that time or shortly after that gold rush began. Some of the buildings, as you can see, are basically unused. This one, of course, for sale. Notice how most of these houses or buildings are placed on wooden supports. Most of them are that way, even the ones that have been redesigned. Imagine the stories that there are that could be told if that building could talk. Many of these stores, of course, have been used for different things over the course of time, but it's actually the Canada Park system that has chosen to invest substantial amounts of money to restore the building structures so that these businesses can then use them. This represents a commitment by Canada, and it should be, because it's a heritage not just to the Northwest Territories or to Canada or to the U.S., which frankly I thought owned all this, but it's also a heritage for the rest of the world, because there are very few people in the world who are well read who are not aware of the gold rush at the Klondike. This apparently is the original post office, restored. And across there, the Palace Grand, which was built almost immediately during the beginning year of the gold rush. And it was built initially from the remains of two steamers that had been beached and broken. And here's a window that gives you an idea of how things might have looked in those days at Trembley's General Store. And a very old building here. It's now a restaurant. Looking down the street in the opposite direction, you see even more buildings that have not yet been restored, except a little bit of painting on the outside to give them an initially good look. But hopefully someday, as this town develops for tourism, these will all be used for commercial uses. Many of these old buildings reflect a rather obvious dynamic, and that is that they started off originally as log buildings that were extremely practical in design, and then as the town became more refined, false fronts were added, as well as additional portions of a building. They moved forward to the sidewalk line or back to the end of the property, as you can see with this building. And here across the street, another example of the same thing. And here are some of the old buildings that have not yet been restored. We'll drive down further. Here are buildings, of course, that attest to the credibility of the other old buildings. Whether they will be restored, who knows? The color of some of these buildings reflects, I believe, the Indian culture, which uses color dramatically, perhaps like the Spanish. And perhaps the reason for that is that it breaks up the monotony of summer's green and winter's white. Here you see another dynamic of rehabilitation where an old house is moved from one lot to another lot, perhaps a more desirable lot or a lot that the owner, of course, already owned. This is a dynamic that you see in Los Angeles in the restoration of those fine homes. Here is an old church that, of course, is about to fall over but has been shored up, hopefully in an attempt sometime in the future when there's money available to come back in and restore it, at least structurally. Older buildings with some kind of character. Look how askew it is. Here's an example of what is done in hydraulic mining, where you strip off the overburden, in other words the soil that's above the gold-bearing conglomerate of quartz, and you strip it off with large hoses that literally rip out the hillside. Here we are approaching dredge number 4 on the Bonanza Creek. Process of being restored. You can see it's surrounded by an embankment, which way it will then fill with water so that it will actually float as it did in the old days. This is the dredge developed for massive mining of these gold-bearing quartz beds. Notice the huge steel pulleys and cables, and the chain links. Your head would fit easily between those links, inside of those links. Notice the huge steel cables up at the top that were used for lowering and raising this entire apparatus via those pulleys. You'll also notice that right at the bottom there we can see the steel hull. At least I think it was steel. What they're attempting to do with this particular derrick is to remove all the mud both inside of it that's collected over the decades up to that water line, remove all that water, remove the mud, and get that thing floating again. Someday it's hoped that it will become operational. Inside, which we can't see of course, were the sluicing operations that actually cleaned out the gold from the rock. And on the other end, of course, a similar system. These both ends could be swung to pick up or deposit in different locations. The dredge itself floated except for a huge steel post on the inside, which was literally driven down to bedrock. And it was on that the entire dredge could shift. It also had a system of pontoons on the side, or what looked like pontoons, and the entire dredge, which displaced 3,000 tons, could be raised up like a duck, and then it would move forward or backward 6 or 7 feet, and then the process would continue. These are the buckets that were in a chain, if you will, in a row, operating on the mechanism that would scoop up the rough material and bring it into the dredge for processing. The dredges were known and defined by the size, the cubic yardage that each of these buckets might hold. One, for example, might be a number 1 dredge, which held 1 cubic yard. Another, a number 6, of course, being exceptionally large. Like a giant worm, this was its excrement end, i.e. from here, this conveyor belt, it dumped all of the rubble left over after the gold had been processed out. Of course, it could swing from side to side, and this creates the rows of rubble that we see on the valley floor. Now here's a close-up view of one of these buckets. You'll get an idea of how big it is. Notice the 2 vertical, huge counterweights. These could be adjusted in height to offset the load of rock that was on the conveyor at any one time. This was in essence then a complete floating gold mining factory. This is an electric steam shovel, converting AC to DC.
When people left here, they just left everything. It was much cheaper to just sort of replace it with a new machine down south than pay the first cost to get it out of here. You know, sort of thing. This machine is very, very interesting. It's my favorite. It's a keystone puncher. And this was the storage tank, and that was part of the Yukon ditch. Okay. That's the piping off the Yukon ditch. Like I said, they utilized what they used. And this is the blacksmith shop. This is the bolt storage area. This is the blacksmith shop. Okay. I've been told that this blacksmith shop could be First World War, except maybe the air hammer. Because it didn't change a lot of their tools. They just pretty well left it where it was. This air hammer has developed a small portable smithy, as we call it. The dredges were in connection with their freaking old time at Tungsten. They knew these air hubs, and what they would do is they pulled out and set up a portable smithy right away. The small mats, they were brought in here to work on this cocoa matting in the bottom of the sluice boxes, right? It catches the gold. It's like a straw. 5 25-pound bars. They'd haul it into the vault, all those bars, and once they got enough in the vault, they would take it to town in sacks. And it had an ice house at the back, and then in the later...
soil. Figuratively speaking, of course, since in most countries it's illegal to use gold as money. However, gold has remained a measure of a country's wealth. That's why it's still being mined. East of Dawson City in the Yukon, the Klondike and its tributaries become lost in a man-made labyrinth created at a snail's pace by giant dredges. Including 5 feet of bedrock. The days of the $1,000 pan are over, but a large operation can still make it pay. In principle, placer mining is as elementary as separating wheat from cheddar. Gold-bearing gravel is washed through a tube set at the proper angle. This causes the sand to be washed away and the heavier gold to settle. In order to trap the particles of gold, rough mats or riffles are set into the tubes. All that remains to be done is periodically to wash the mats clean of gold dust. Curiously, no successful mechanical method has yet been devised to sort foreign matter from placer gold. The magnetic black sand, the iron pyrite, the buckshot and bullets, even gold coins and dentures lost by miners 50 years ago must all be sorted from the gold by hand. Gold was the first metal known to man. It was prized for its untarnishable brightness and purity. has been used to build great cities and forge empires. But, just as often, it has corrupted men and fed the flames of war. Chemically, gold is one of the most stable of elements. It is hardly affected by oxygen or water. It doesn't tarnish or corrode. Almost no acid will affect it. Gold is virtually indestructible. For all these qualities, men still go to the ends of the earth to find it and dig it up. The Yukon's placer gold has been buried in white quartz gravel for hundreds of thousands of years. In all that time, the metal itself hasn't changed, except perhaps that water and gravel have ground it finer. Gold, for all practical purposes, lasts forever, but its value changes with the meaning attached by man.